Hi, and welcome to Teacher U's Microsoft Excel Tutorial for PCs Part 1. In this video, we're going to be working towards two objectives. The first, teachers will be able to arrange their data in rows and columns appropriately, allowing for easy and efficient aggregation. And secondly, teachers will be able to add any additional columns that will better help to collect and arrange required data. So as we begin to think about the best ways for you to present your student achievement data as you work to defend your masters this upcoming spring, we're going to take a look at Excel and how it can better help you do this. So in this particular session, which is part 1 of 3 when looking at Microsoft Excel for PCs, we're going to figure out if our data is arranged the best way to get started with summarizing and sharing it. If it's not, how we get it to that place. And then secondly, how we add any additional columns so that we can add necessary information to begin cutting our data. Okay? So in order to do that, we're going to first take a look at the data. And through both part 1, 2, and 3 of this series, we're going to be using the same 3 data sets: data set A, data B, and data C. We're then going to take a look at rows versus columns to make sure that our objectives and our student data is in the appropriate place, as well as our student information. And the last thing we're going to look at is how to add columns. If you don't have columns containing necessary information that you're going to use to cut and present your data, we're going to take a look at how you add that information here. So let's start by taking a look at the data. And when we open up data A, B, and C, we're going to need to make sure that our students are listed in column A going down the left side of the page, and the objectives are going across the top in row 1. This is important when it comes to using filters and formulas, which we're going to talk about in part 2 of this series. So for now, we just want to check our data sets and make sure that this information is in the correct place. So we're going to go ahead and start with data A. And as I look at each of these data sets, it's going to function a little bit like a read aloud. I'm going to kind of walk you through what I'm thinking as I see this, the changes that I think need to be made in order for our data to be in the right place to better summarize it coming up in part 2. And then if I need to make any changes, I'm going to show you how to do that. So as I look at data A, I see a lot of colors. So I'm going to try and figure out what the colors mean as well as what the information in each of the different cells means. So I notice that all the way on the far left, we do see our student names, and we have first name and last name. For privacy purposes, we've obviously changed these to student 1, student 2, student 3. So these student names are right where they need to be. We need to see these in the very far left column. In this case, it's in 2 columns because we have 1 for each of the names. Following that, it looks like we're looking at information from a specific assessment that students took. I see they had questions 1, 2, 3, 4, and on through question 17. So this first set of data is showing the answer that that student selected for each of these. This is not information that we're going to need as we begin to summarize our data, because we want to look at overall percent mastery of specific objectives and then overall in the test. So what I can actually do is I can go ahead and hide this data to make the spreadsheet a bit more clean. This is an optional step. You absolutely don't need to do this, but it does make it a little bit easier when working with our data later. In order to hide these columns, I'm going to select the columns that I don't need to see, and then I'm going to right click on them. And when I do that, all the way down here at the bottom, I see there's a hide option. Right underneath that, you'll see unhide. So if you want these columns to reappear and we're not deleting them, you would do the same thing, and you would go ahead and highlight the span where they're hidden. We see that it jumps from column B to T there, so we know that's where they're hidden. I'm going to highlight these, right click, and select unhide. And there they are. Okay, so it's easy to make them reappear. For the time being, I'm going to hide them to make this a little bit more clean. Okay. So now we see over here in columns W, AB, AE, AH, AK, and AL, we see the percent mastery of that student for each of the specific objectives. Now for these examples, we're going to be looking at overall student achievement data and student mastery of overall objectives. So what we actually want to look at is column AM, which is the last one here where we average out what is that student's score or their overall mastery for this assessment. Okay, I'm going to leave these here because we might want to take a look at these later, and we might be interested in breaking it down by more specific objectives. So I'll leave those here. Okay, so we see that this spreadsheet is now set up the way that we want. We have our student objectives going across the top, and we have our student names going down the left-hand side. Okay, now the second thing that we're going to look at is adding necessary columns. What we're going to use this for is if you're looking to break down student data, then we're going to want more information about each student. So for example, there are many ways that we can break down our student data, and I'm going to give you a couple samples that you might be using. One might be student sex. This would be used if you want to break down your numbers by male versus female students to see what the comparison looks like in your class. In order to do that, we first need to know if each student is a male or a female. So we would add a column for that. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of this, and in column AN, where it's blank, I'm going to title this column sex. So this is where I'm going to enter student sex, and then I would go through and I would enter either female or male. And you again can type this out completely, but for filtering purposes we just need a distinction like this, and an M and an F would work just fine. You would go down throughout the column and enter that information for each student. Our spreadsheet is now beginning to contain more information than just student mastery, but also the specific information about each student. Another category you might look at would be race. If you wanted to break down your student achievement data at the end of the year by the race of your students, you would need to add a column so that we can enter that information for each student. As we're looking at student information, row number 4 should contain all information for student number 1. So when you look across the spreadsheet, you should see that for objective in column W, they had 86% mastery. The objective in column AB, they had 67%. And as you follow the student across, it should contain all the information about them. So we're going to enter their race following that same pattern over here to the right. Okay? And I'm going to enter African American for this first student. And you would do the same thing, and you would follow through on all your students and write the race for each of your students. In part 2, we're going to view how this information is going to allow us to break down our student data, and later in part 3, we're going to see how we can then graph that student data and visually represent how our different students did on overall mastery broken down by different categories. Okay? So that's for data set A. I'm going to go ahead and save that and close it out so that when we return in part 2, our data will be there. And now we're going to move on to data set B. Now as I look at data set B, I see some more colors. I'm going to try and figure out what our data is here. I do notice, however, that we see our objectives are listed on the left side of the screen and our students are listed across the top row. This is the opposite of what we want it to look like. We actually want our students, like I mentioned before, going down the left-hand side of the screen. So the first step is we need to switch all this data around. And for the beginning Excel user, this might seem like a pretty time-consuming task to re-enter all your student data. You would have to open up another spreadsheet and type it all back in again manually. However, luckily Excel provides a little trick for us, and I'm going to show you if you have entered your student achievement data with student names going across the top, it is very easy to go ahead and switch that around. So the first thing I'm going to do is highlight all of the data that I have in the spreadsheet that I want in the spreadsheet that we're going to be using. I'm going to highlight all of it. I'm then going to right click and I'm going to tell it that we want to copy it. Okay. I'm going to open up a new spreadsheet. And then rather than just straight paste like you normally would, I'm going to right click and I'm going to select paste special. When I do that, it's giving me a bunch of options about how I want to paste that data. I do want to paste all the data, which is automatically selected, so we're going to stick with that one. The next category that I see is operation. We're going to leave that on none. We're not doing any math with the data yet. We're going to take a look at that in part 2. But down here at the bottom, we see an option that says transpose. And this means to flip our data around. So when I select that option and click OK, it's going to paste it. But now you see that we have objectives going across the top. And if we scroll down the left-hand side, we're going to see student names are there. So it has completely flipped around all our data for us into the exact position that we want it to be in to begin calculating and examining data. Now the second thing we're going to look at is, do we have the information that we need in order to cut our student data? So for data set B, I'm going to use a couple more examples for things that you could be looking for. For this one, I'm going to select race as well as class. So this will give me an opportunity to break data down both by race, which I showed as an example before, and then in this one we're going to take a look at the class that each student is in. So again, you're going to go down and you're going to say student number 1's race is white. Student number 2 is African American, and again, I'm just making this information up for sample purposes. For student 3, I'm looking at Native American, so on. And you would go and enter all the race information for all your students.